Hello, everyone. In today's episode of My Smart Friends, we'll talk about why legacy and estate organizing are so important, what an after loss professional is, and how these professionals can help us after the death of a loved one. I didn't even know these amazing professionals existed 3 months ago. At that time, I had already spent more than 30 hours on helping with the estate of a family member. And also, sadly, around that time, a client very unexpectedly passed away, leaving a very shocked, very aggrieved spouse. As I personally vet any professional before recommending anyone to a client, I reached out to our guest today to learn more about her and her services for the surviving spouse. I was amazed at what I learned and wanted to share with our listeners. We, as women over 45, are experiencing more death than we did in our younger years. We're most also more likely to be caring for an older parent or loved one who may or may not have their legacy and estate organized. And we are often the ones left dealing with the estate after the loss of a loved one. I'm so excited to welcome Kylee Bandy, CEO and founder of After Loss Advisors, to walk us how she and other professionals like her can help us with the sensitive legacy and estate planning process and also help ease the administrative burden after the loss of a loved one. Please welcome Kylee. Hi, Kylee. Thanks for joining
Hi.
us today.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate your time. As I shared with the listeners, I was so amazed by the services you offer. Can you tell us a little bit more, just general? I didn't realize there were after loss professionals. I didn't realize there were people to help us with legacy and estate planning other than an estate planner. Can you tell us about your role and why you started your business?
Absolutely. Yeah. Part of why I started my business was because, as you mentioned, going through it with a family member and a client recently, I went through it when we lost my dad about 6 years ago. And similarly, we had great professionals supporting us. We had a estate attorney, a probate attorney, we had a financial advisor, and a CPA. And they were all so integral in helping us through that time. But there's still a lot that falls on the family or the executor. In the state of Colorado, that's called the personal representative. And we looked to see if there was someone who could help us with the nitty gritty details. We'll dive into it more, I'm sure, but dealing with utility companies or transferring things into the surviving spouse, which in this case is my mom, into her name. And we couldn't find anyone. And so my mom was working full time. I was working full time. My brother was working full time. And there's just so much that you have to do after a death. And we wanted the support and we couldn't find it. And so it took us about 18 months to settle my dad's estate. And when we did, and when we were done, my mom and I were talking and just saying, why isn't this a field? It's so necessary. There's so many people who need help. And often when we do lose someone, it's in the throes of normal life things happening. People have kids or other aging parents or work, other things going on in addition to taking on these big roles. And that was where the idea for me started, that, hey, maybe this is an opportunity. It certainly felt like one for our family.
Yeah.
And the more I talked to other professionals, other friends who had lost loved ones, the more it seemed like, yeah, this is really a necessary space.
Well, I think I've helped clients when there's been a death in their family, but my role is different than, as you said, the PR executor. And I think people don't realize how much actual time it takes and how the process is. It's very imperfect, very quirky, and very frustrating. And so when you're grieving, to add paperwork and roadblocks and processes that don't make sense,
Mhm.
it's it's not a it's time consuming and it's kind of soul sucking. Is that the right
I
word?
think that's the perfect word to describe it. That's exactly how we felt. I actually a great example of that. Last week I'm supporting a client right now and called to notify an institution that I won't name, but notified them of the death of this person, notified them of the details that they needed to know, and asked where we could upload the documentation they needed, death certificate, etc. Said this very clearly to the person on the other side of the phone. And about 30 seconds later, they told me they needed to speak to the account holder, who is the person who had died. And so imagine being a family member having to repeat over and over and over to customer service agents, and it's not their fault. They're on scripts. However, for the griever, the family, that's really difficult. That was hard for us to have to repeat over and over, my dad has died, my dad has died, etc. And so that's a task that we take on because as a third party, it's much easier to be able to deal with somebody versus when you're grieving and really angry that the situation exists at all. And every institution has their own rules and regulations of what they need, what processes, as you mentioned, need to be followed. And it is hard to keep track of.
Well, what people also don't realize is these different institutions, they have different processes. Not only that, but they also have different lingo. So
Mm-hmm.
if your loved one had accounts at different institutions, you're having to understand and learn the different lingo and process for each of them. And again, possibly not speaking with somebody who is um, best trained. I don't know what but who's working off a script. How about that?
Correct. Correct.
There's
Yeah, working off a script. Maybe they've never been through. Not that you have to have been through it personally to have empathy in the situation, but yeah, they're just doing their jobs, and that doesn't make it easier on the person on the other side of the call as well.
So we sort of skipped ahead to the after loss professionals. We'll backtrack to the legacy and estate organization, which is kind of prior to the loss of somebody. Can you tell us what an after loss professional is? And again, that's how I found you. I happened to be in a group, a study group with other financial planners, and they brought on an after loss professional who's not in our state to talk about what she does and what they are. And I, again, was what you do. Can you explain that? What an after
Yes.
loss professional is, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Yes, there is a growing field of us, which is fantastic because I think, the more of us there are, the more people we can support. But essentially an after loss professional is someone that is supporting an executor, a personal representative, a family as they are going through end of life logistics, really is what I call it. So that can be legacy preparation, that can be after a loss and dealing with all of that side of things. But think of us like your personal concierge, project manager, accountability partner as you're going through all things having to do with aging and end of life. And so, what we're really trying to do is make it easier for you, provide that peace of mind on the legacy side, as well as providing peace of mind for your family members by getting things organized. And so we're not providing legal advice, financial advice, but we're working with those professionals to really create that comprehensive look for someone, as well as creating directories of things like where are your digital assets? Where are your financial institutions? What are your wishes for your burial, for your funeral, for your celebration? And so, really taking that more holistic 360-degree view of someone's life to say, if something happened to you yesterday, what would the people in your life need to know that they don't know? And often the answer to that question is everything or a lot,
Yeah.
because we know so much about ourselves. Other people know snippets of that, but not all of the details they would need to settle our affairs once we're gone. So that's a little bit more the legacy side. And then the after loss side is working with families once a death has occurred to kind of put those puzzle pieces together of, okay, what is the estate looking like? Let's get in touch with an attorney. Let's get in touch with any other professionals, financial advisors, et cetera, that may have been in the picture and try to create a roadmap of what steps need to happen next.
So would you say that all afterlife loss professionals or after loss professionals also do the legacy and estate planning beforehand, or is it? Yeah, because after loss professionals just sounds like you call them after someone's passed away, but they should really
Completely.
be calling you beforehand, or is that just your business and your services?
Yeah, great question. Many people, so there is a professional organization that we all are a part of, or that many of us are, called PALS, Professionals of After Loss Services. And from the folks in that group, I know many of us do provide services both before and after because they naturally do go hand in hand
Mm-hmm.
of, if we've worked with someone after a loss, maybe a widow, she may see the benefit of being prepared now because she's going through what it looks like to not be prepared. And so then we work with her on the front end to get her affairs in order so her adult children or whomever it may be in her life is not having to be the one to go through all the detective work of finding out what's going on. So everyone runs their business a little differently. for me, my business is called After Loss Advisors. I started it because of my own personal experience after the death of my dad, and it naturally transitioned into including the legacy organization services because of that exact example of the more people I told what I did after a death, the more I realized what a huge opportunity it is to work with people to make sure that things are easier while we're still alive, while we still have the capacity to write these things down, make these decisions, share them with the people who need to know them. And so it was just a natural transition to have both as a part of my services.
Well, and control. A lot of people want control of where their assets go, and working with someone like you and an estate attorney and their financial advisor, all their professionals can really help lay that out so that what happens after you pass away is what you wanted to happen. Can you
So true.
walk us? Yeah, sorry.
No, I am agreeing with you in full. I think autonomy is really important in life in a lot of ways, and this is one of those, most certainly.
So let's talk about if someone contacts you, somebody passes away and they decide that they need your services. So you haven't worked with them before. What does that look like? What does that experience look like for them?
Yeah, so we offer complimentary consultations to anyone who wants to know more about our services, both before and after a loss. So that looks like, first of all, we can provide our services nationally. So we work with folks over the phone or virtual in a virtual capacity. And so we can meet with them via Zoom, typically anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, just to really hear about what are you going through, what is the estate looking like, and trying to get a feel for what those details might look like. And vice versa, because this space is kind of new, really wanting to make sure that they understand the ways that we can and the ways that we can't support. I've had people reach out thinking that I may be able to help them draft legal documents or things like that. And that's not an area of service that we can provide. But a big area of service that we do provide is connecting these clients to professionals that they need in other spaces. And so just being clear with them on what we do, as well as understanding what their needs are. And in that call, we kind of can say, yes, I think this is going to be a great fit. And if it is, the next steps from there, we draft a little bit of a project proposal, if you will. Hey, from the information you shared with us, I'm hearing that this is going to take about this amount of time. And based from there, we recommend certain packages that are hourly based to these people to work with. And should they choose to move forward with us, then we move into the nitty gritty. We're creating a customized task plan, that customized roadmap, really, to help walk them through not just the steps that they need to take, but how we can partner with them to get these tasks accomplished. And so there's some things that the personal representative executor has to be the one to do, but there's a lot of things that we can do to get them 3 steps further ahead in the process to make it easier. We can notify institutions of death, submit death certificates, get the paperwork needed. And that way we're saving them, those initial 2 or 3 phone calls that, for me, having called these institutions, I know the right words to say. I know the phone numbers to call. It takes me probably about half the amount of time it would if it were your first time calling an institution to notify of death. So we really then work on, from that customized task plan, accomplishing tasks. And from there, just having weekly check-ins to make sure that everything is being stayed on top of and that the client is happy and we're doing what we need to do to settle the estate.
Have you found that clients or people seeking your services are surprised by how many hours it takes?
Yes, and there's some varying statistics out there. If you were to search how long will it take to settle an estate, there's varying things that you see, but it most certainly it takes a lot longer than people anticipate. And every estate is different, right? It depends on, was there a will? Was there an estate plan? Are we working with a trust? How many assets? Was there real estate? There's so many components. So, when people ask me, what is the average amount of time you work with someone? I can support averages, but on the after loss side, as an example, I've worked with people as little as 15 hours and as high as a currently running 50 hours plus. And that's just the support I'm providing in addition to the hours they're putting in. So I know you mentioned 30 hours for your family member's estate. And
Yeah, we're not done.
I was going to say that
Yeah.
actually feels not too terrible to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely ranges, but people are surprised by the length of time it takes.
And I mean, I think you and I talked about it when we met. A lot of us who, we think about the laws of our parents or older loved one, but also we're thinking about our children who are still minors. And I think we're like, okay, well, just a family member will do it, right? I have my
Mhm.
brother, or I have my sister, a friend, and you don't realize how much time and effort you're asking this person who, again, isn't in the business and also probably has a job and a family of their own.
Yes.
Do you find that that's becoming more and more of who's reaching out?
Yeah, definitely. For me, my most frequently served clients are widows or widowers, so those surviving spouses, and for varying reasons, but mostly they may be working still. The grief is too much. There's a lot of components that go into that, and then adult children. So to your point, maybe or a sibling, and so it's those people who are in their working age. They have minor children, to your point, or children adult, whatever it may be, and they have a lot going on. And it, like you said, they don't have any formal training in what it means to be a personal representative because there really isn't any. They
Right.
don't have the bandwidth necessarily to take on all the tasks. These institutions that need to be called and dealt with operate on business hours. And so if you're working full time and you have kids, making the time to find or finding the time to make those calls is really difficult. So having a partner like an after loss professional to be your support system through that time, not only to acknowledge what needs to be done, but really to get some of those initial tasks done can take a lot off of someone's plate when they're feeling overwhelmed.
Now, how do you manage the group of professionals? Where do you fit into that? Because you are part of this team that, and I'm sure for some clients, you're the lead, right? Which is
Yes.
great because at that time they need somebody to sort of take the ship and steer it in the right direction. What does that look like?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And I will use a commonly used phrase in our field, but it depends. And the reason I say it depends is because it's really important to me and for us to work with clients in a way that feels best for them. So I've worked with clients who have said, "Hey, I want to take lead. I would like your support with these tasks and creating the task plan," and we run from there. Others say, "Hey, please take on as much as you can. I want you to be the point person with the realtor, with the attorney, with everyone that I need to be involved with because I just can't right now." And so, in that instance, that's what we do with their written approval. We can have those conversations and take the tasks on with those professionals. So, in that instance, I use the phrase we're the quarterback of the situation. We're working with the full team, but kind of being that conversation spearhead to express the client's wishes and communicating back and forth with the client on those things as well to make sure it's still aligned with what feels comfortable for them, what feels right for them. Their involvement is still necessary in some spaces, of course, but really just trying to work with them to say, "I know you're going through it right now. We are here to support you as your partner, as the lead, as a backup, whatever feels best for you."
How does that work with all the financial information? You to sign a confidentiality agreement with clients and they give you access to certain things, or how does that work with that, with you?
Yeah, so typically we're not dealing with any of the sensitive information. So, for credit cards, for example, we're getting last four. We're knowing which institutions are being worked with. We may know account numbers or necessary information to at least get us through the first phone call with a customer service rep to prove
Sure,
that we know the account we're talking
sure.
about. But we're not getting values. We're not making distribution choices, anything like that. That's really where working with the financial team that the person has in place is important. And really, at that point, we're notifying of death, saying, "How can I upload the death certificate?" Depending on the different, every institution has a different way they like it done.
Hmm.
And so it's more of that initial information that we're helping to contact, close or transfer, or get the forms necessary to close or transfer. If there's really, investment decisions being made or distribution decisions being made, that's where we feel like it's so important for our clients to be working with an advisor because we are not trained in that space. So we do not give advice in that realm, more just taking kind of like the logistical tasks off of people's plates in that space.
And I imagine you work with elderly folk who have passed away, who maybe only had paper in various places. How
Hmm.
does that work if you're remote? I mean, it's the client, then the PR or the executor who's having to dig through that, and you're telling them which pieces to find.
Yeah, yeah, and if they really would benefit from having that in-person support, that's where having a network like the PALS network I mentioned earlier is so fantastic because maybe there's a partnership we can do if there's someone in their city or state that can help with the in-person component. Maybe they have an adult child, if it's a widow or widower, maybe there's someone in their life, a sibling, a child who can help kind of go through that paperwork as you mentioned. Because when it is in person locally, we can go to people's homes if they want us to and help them dig through that. Do the empathetic detective work is a term someone in my space has coined to
Yeah,
really help them find what is necessary to make that roadmap to move forward. Because sometimes after death, if there hasn't been legacy preparation, a lot of what we're doing is trying to put the pieces together because maybe someone doesn't know where the checking account was.
right.
Was there a life insurance policy? And if they weren't working with a financial advisor ahead of time, those things may not be listed anywhere. So, um, yeah, sometimes it's just trying to find the pieces that need to create the map before even creating the map.
What do you, I mean, I'm sure you've come into lots of different situations in after loss advising. What's a worst case scenario? And it doesn't have to be a real life scenario, but um, what would that look like for you to go into a family and say, "Oh my gosh, this is going to be a lot of work," and right, we all get busy, and it's really
Yes.
estate planning is really not on people's minds, and we'll talk about that with the legacy and estate organization piece, of which I'm a big proponent. Um, but I mean, I think people don't understand what a big ball of yarn it is to unwind,
Yes.
right? Could you tell us a
Yes.
little bit of what that might look like?
Yes. I think in my example, I'll probably pull together 6 different examples that come
Yeah,
into one big ball of
yeah,
this hasn't happened, but the
right,
individual components have. I would say first and foremost, when there's not an estate plan in place, there's no will, there's no directives about what they want to happen. That's really difficult first and foremost because then the people who are left behind to guess and have to deal with the legal system to get appointed to be able to have the control to make any actions on the estate. Also, when that doesn't exist, and attorneys can speak to this more, but when an estate plan doesn't exist, the time that it can take to settle the estate often becomes much longer. Just there's more steps, more processes to go through. So that would be what I would say is first. Second, if that weren't true, or even when there is an estate plan, if family members haven't been notified about what the wishes were, so hey, we're leaving this to this person and this to this person, or hey, your brother is the personal representative, not you, and it maybe the not you person was the oldest sibling who always assumed it would be. There can be a lot of emotions involved, so really clear communication from us to the people who will be doing the things in our lives and the people who won't be doing them can be really important to save future relationships and drama. I'd say after that, when we are looking at the accounts that we have, if beneficiaries and transfers on death, payable on death, you may listeners may see the terms TOD, POD. That's what those stand for. If those aren't set up ahead of time, that also just creates more mess. And that's if we even know what the accounts are to begin with. So if beneficiaries aren't set up, that just and there isn't a will in place, again, that just adds to what needs to go through probate process, which attorneys can be helpful with, and families can go through that process on their own. But I always advise seeking attorney guidance at least to begin with there. I just to backtrack a second, we're talking about beneficiaries and accounts. Sometimes families don't even know what accounts existed.
yeah,
And so they're having to scramble to, like we said earlier, go through paperwork, which sometimes we don't get paper statements anymore. But if there are paper statements, it's going through paper statements. If the family has access to devices like a phone or a computer, maybe they can access an email account that would show them statements or invoices or bills that are coming in. But that's another big thing we see happen all the time is if someone has a locked computer and a locked phone and no one else knows how to access those things, we're really scrambling to try to figure out even more so, where do we go from here? There are steps that can be taken. There are, court orders that can happen to open iPhones, for example, but there's just not sharing all of these details, the logins, the codes, with the people who need them before we're gone, can create, again, like you said, just this ball of yarn, a spider web of, this needs to be true for this to happen. And then it just goes down the hill from there if we don't have access to certain things. I could go on and on, but those are some of the big ones I think that I see logistically that are more often than not most frustrating for families, because they can't move forward without certain information, or it becomes more difficult to do so. And we do have some tools in place. There's searches, there's online searches that can help us discover missing retirement accounts and missing benefits and things like that. Again, it just takes longer. Sometimes it's not 100% accurate. Sometimes the information that we need might be a year later that it's uploaded because the account hasn't been accessed in a certain amount of time or otherwise. I'm sure you see that too. What on your side?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think it's a lot of detective work, right? For someone who's
Yes.
already grieving, already busy with, um, you know, life.
Yes.
So that's hard. What do you I guess we can start talking about the estate and legacy organization, because I'm a huge proponent. I recommend to all clients that they have some sort of estate plan in place. I obviously don't do any of the paperwork. I refer them to a licensed attorney. How do you help in that situation? And well, I have another question, but I'll try to hold it.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. And again, we also don't provide the legal advice. So making the connections to a licensed attorney, if they don't already have one, is a big part of what we do, or encouraging them to get that will and estate plan in place. A trust-based plan might be right for some people as well. And so once that's set up, part of what we do, and also financial advisors and attorneys, there's some crossover here, but ensuring that things are titled properly. So if there is a trust, making sure that the properties are titled in the name of that trust as advised by the attorney. I worked with a family recently who had quite a bit of real estate, and they had had a trust for 4 years, and none of the real estate was titled into the name of the trust. So I won't get into the nitty gritty of what that means, but again, it would just open it up to probate and headaches for the family surviving had we not caught that. Really where I come in to do work that other professionals sometimes will do, but often don't, is helping to create those directories, as I mentioned earlier. So we're talking about really lists and information that someone would need if something happened to us. So that can be a wide range of topics, including our financial accounts, our device codes and access. On the digital side, our subscriptions, our logins, usernames, passwords. I help them to set up password management systems, whether that's in the cloud or in another version that might feel better. I have people who use locked Excel files. There's varying degrees of security, of course, but there's also varying degrees of comfort with technology. So really, again, meeting people where they're at and where they're comfortable to get that component set up. We're helping to talk about pet care plans. Things like if something happened to me, I have 2 dogs, and if something were to happen to my husband and I both, what do we want to happen to them? What are their rituals? What do they like? What food do they eat? Who's their vet?
You're a good
Things that
dog mom. Yeah.
I really love my dogs. I
Yeah.
want to make sure that if something happens to us, that they are well taken care of, because they're our fur babies. So
And that's
um,
huge now. I mean, people are
yeah,
they're leaving trust for their dog's care or their pet's
yes.
care because they want to make sure that they'll be okay as well.
Exactly. And obviously within legal plans, there are components for children or dependents where there's guardianship, things like that. And that's really important to work with an attorney on. But same thing with dependent and children. We work with families to make sure that their information is listed. What medical information would someone need to know about the child if they weren't able, I would say most teenagers probably would be able to speak to that. But if they're younger children, do they know what medications they take, when they need to take them, who is the pediatrician, what school information is necessary for someone else to know. So we're going through, again, all of those details in someone's life that are typically outside of the estate plan, the legal side, and still making sure that it's listed somewhere: insurance policies, vehicles, things like that, that it's just all written down in a component in a space that someone else could access it should they need to and be able to pick up the pieces from there.
Well, and I imagine in your role that it might be easier for, say, older dad to talk with you about these things than his adult child. It just is more businesslike and doesn't seem as emotional. Do you
Mm.
find that a lot?
I do. I would say I don't know that it's gender specific. I've actually had sometimes the opposite where um, the one spouse or another. I haven't really had one or the other. I've had situations where one spouse is more comfortable talking about things than the other.
Yeah.
There are instances, of course, where one spouse maybe has more knowledge about a certain space than another, which is just one more reason that it's so important to do the legacy and estate organizing because, talk about another worst case scenario. I worked with a widow where her husband did everything financially.
Hmm.
He knew all the logins, paid all the bills,
Hmm.
handled everything, and she did a lot of other things for the family. That just wasn't one of them. But when he was gone, that's such an important concept, and not just concept, such an important reality of our lives that finances are important. And that was a huge stress for her to figure it out. Thankfully, they were okay, and we were able to figure out a lot of things to get them moving forward and work with a financial advisor to help do that.
Yeah.
But that is a space where if one spouse really is the owner of some of these areas, it's even more important for these things to be written down with clear instructions and shared with the other person.
So I think when people hear after loss professional, they're thinking, oh, this is for later. But
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm hearing from you, and I get the pushback from my younger clients as well, that my stuff is not that complicated. Why do I need to do this? Like, when do you suggest someone reaching out to you to help with that legacy and estate organization?
Yeah.
Because there are people who are like, well, I have an estate plan, it's done, but they don't think about all these pieces that are so difficult after the loss of someone. The things
Yes.
that the will and the trust don't encompass.
Yes. Um, to be perfectly blunt, none of us know when we're going to die. I,
What?
I know, shocker. And obviously there's statistics that lean more heavily to older in age, but at the end of the day, we don't know. And so not to play fear factor or put that into the role, but I think it's just one of those things we never know what's going to happen to. And maybe it's not even death. Maybe you're traveling out of the country and something happens where you can't get back for a month or two. I mean, we just went through a global pandemic 4 years ago where a lot of unknowns that probably people, myself included, had never considered became reality. And so this doesn't just have to be death. This could be a short-term incapacity due to illness or an accident. This could be being stuck out of the country. This could be a lot of different things where it's still important for someone to be able to pick up, maybe not on managing your financial accounts, but on the pet care and child care. There's a lot of those components. And so that's my long answer. My short answer is if you're 18 and older and have autonomy in your life, there are things that people in your life need to know in order to handle that if those situations were to become true. That being said, most of the clients I actually work with who actually hire me are ranging probably mid 40s and up. In the mid 40s are typically people who have children or are kind of maybe they've gone through something with a spouse or a sibling where they've realized the importance of knowing that this should happen, and that's where we're getting started with them.
If someone was looking to retain someone like you, what should they be looking for? Is the PALS accreditation like the gold standard, or what do you
That's
think?
a great question. Yeah, I think first and foremost, I fully believe in the PALS program. I think that's a great accreditation. We've all gone through training, and we all kind of speak a similar language about how do our processes work? How do we provide really professional support to people in this time? Because there is sensitive information being dealt with. There's also sensitive emotions being dealt with. So there's a real level of empathy that's required, I think, to have the conversations around both the legacy and estate organizing and the after loss. Of course, people know there needs to be empathy in that space. But when I'm sitting down with someone in the legacy and estate side and talking about their burial plans and what they would want to be, how they would want to be remembered by, sometimes these are questions that people have never really thought about. And so it's important for them to know you're in a safe space. We don't have to talk about this today or at all if you don't want to, but these are things I can help you talk through or get you connected with someone else who may be able to. So I think the PALS accreditation is fantastic. Ultimately, you really want to make sure that when you are working with someone in this space, that it's the right personality fit too, because just like I said, you're going to be talking about a lot, working together on some sensitive things, and you want to make sure that there's trust involved there. So I think asking for previous client testimonials, looking at accreditation, what is their background, how long have they been doing it, what's their why? I think that matters
I do too.
for everything in life.
Yes,
But
agreed.
what is your why are you doing this?
Mhm.
And for me, I shared it at the beginning, but I've been through it. I've been through it personally. I saw how hard it was to deal with the death when things were semi organized, but also in many ways not. And so that's my inspiration to help people to not go through that, or if they are going through it, to make it a little bit more palatable.
And is there a way for folks to kind of vet an after loss professional? On our side, we have FINRA where they can check whether we have any convictions, right? Like these sort of
Yes.
things where you're talking about very personal, you're sharing the most personal, intimate details of your financial life, which kind of colors everything. And I would assume that's the same for you, where there people are generally afraid of being taken advantage of,
Of
especially when
course.
they're in a vulnerable spot. Is there a way that they can vet people other than, of course, listening to your gut, but other
Yes.
ways online or however to check to make sure that they're with someone trustworthy?
Yes, that's one more benefit with the PALS accreditation and going through that program is anyone who's a member of PALS has been background checked. All of our business information has been checked. We have to have proof of our insurance as well to be a listed business member. So if you're working with someone from the PALS network, you know you're working with someone who's had the background check, who has their legal documentation in a row, and has their insurance in a row. Because again, God forbid something were to happen, you want to make sure you're working with a professional who is insured and has cybersecurity and all of the different things that are necessary to be dealing with personal information. So I would say that's kind of to your point earlier, you mentioned like the gold standard. That's what I would say the gold standard is for now. And as this space continues to grow and evolve, I think there will hopefully be more parameters in place to help clients know when they're doing their own research of which professional to work with, who they're getting into business with, or who they're choosing to work with. So, yeah, I think it's a combination. To your point, trust your gut, but also let's make sure we're
Right.
working with people who have their ducks in a row.
Well, I mean, I think at that point, you're vulnerable. It might be really hard to trust your gut at that moment.
Completely.
Who is a good fit for you? I mean, they go to the PALS website, which I'll share in the show notes, and they find you. You practice in Colorado, but you also can help virtually. Who would be a good fit for you, client wise?
Yeah. So on both sides, it's someone who is willing to accept help. And that can be really hard in this space because sometimes we want to do it our own, but sometimes we're fearful to get started. And there's a lot of anxiety that can come around that. So someone who's willing to have that dialogue and knows that there's support that they need and is willing to accept it, which for all of us can be difficult. Otherwise, I would say typically on the after loss side, it needs to be the person who has the legal authority to make the decisions on behalf of the estate. I can't really support as much with the proxy work, if you will, with the notifying institutions of death, et cetera, if I'm not doing it on behalf of the appointed person. So if they aren't appointed yet when we get started working, that can be okay as long as we're working towards that point. But in instances where there are 5 kids and they don't know who's going to do what, that might be a good place for me to advise them in that complimentary consultation of, hey, let's get some of these steps done. And once one of you has been appointed, let's circle back and I can support you all in that space. But otherwise, as we kind of have talked through in our time together today, every person is so unique and every legacy organization is unique. Every after loss is unique. So for me, it's more so just the folks who desire the support to walk through this time in this space together. And ultimately, I would like to work with them to meet their needs and do that in a customized way.
Before I let you go, I also wanted to. I thought this was interesting. The the legacy organization, we all have family members, loved ones, maybe it's ourselves, that we have a house full of things and pictures. And, I think about it and we don't know what we will
Mm-hmm.
do with that after, right?
Yes.
And I think you and I talked about it in our conversation that you will actually go in and help a family member or loved one organize their legacy in a way that feels meaningful and good to them. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Usually a family member feels like it's their duty to do that, but how nice to
Yeah.
to outsource.
Yes. Well, and I think while we still have the control and the autonomy to say what we want to happen with our things, it's a great time to do so because when we are gone and when someone is left to deal with our stuff, the physical personal property, there can be a lot of guilt around that
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of um, just a lot of emotions around the things that we held close in our lives. I I am guilty of this. When my grandparents have passed away, my dad passed away, I've held on to things that I know were important to them because I can't imagine throwing them away
Right.
because they didn't necessarily leave instructions for what they did or didn't want to happen with them. And so what I work with people on the legacy side while they're still around to make the decisions and have that clarity is have the conversations about, is there someone that you feel really strongly that this should go to? There's legal documents. There's the distribution of personal property that you can actually fill out to make this happen. But outside of that, even of going through and saying, what would you want to happen with your clothes, with this artwork? And I actually utilize a platform called Artifacts that is a really cool option for people in this space where we can take photos, upload images, videos, voicemails, voice memos about things that we may feel really strongly connected to. So that way our family is not just knowing that, hey, I want you to keep this item, but hey, I want you to keep this item and here's why. And here's my voice being recorded telling you about this piece of furniture and how it was my great grandmother's and I used to eat dinner using this on this table or whatever it may be to tie some of the sentimentality into it. On the other side, for the things that we don't care as much about, I think it's equally important to let the people in our lives know, hey, this of course is part of my home and my life, but when I'm gone, please don't feel guilt about donating it or selling it or trashing it if must be. That can just relieve a lot of the added emotional burden during an already emotional time for folks. So we just kind of help facilitate the conversations, put it in writing, and share it with the family, whether it's in writing or whether it's in a family meeting type capacity, so they know ahead of time what to expect.
Well, I imagine you've heard some really amazing family stories through that.
Yeah, I there's actually a woman, and this goes to something that's not necessarily physical property, but she's an amazing chef in her own home. She's not a chef professionally, but she could be. And she has all these recipes that she has in her mind, and she knows them by heart. She cooks from heart. But if
Yes.
something were to happen to her, her family, and this was her telling me this, her family would be devastated because she holds all of the holiday recipes, the favorite cookies, the lasagna recipe, all of these things in her mind. And so that as we were working through what her legacy looked like, that was something that came up. And so now one of the projects we're working on is creating that recipe book. She's hoping to gift it to her family this Christmas as kind of like a legacy project before she's even gone, which I think is so beautiful. But again, just speaks to the things that we all know that other people may not know, that if we were to be gone again, who would know the lasagna recipe? That'd be so tough.
It's true. Well, I mean, food is such a human
Yes.
connection. And uh, I have friends whose their most treasured legacies from their mom or their aunt or whomever are these recipe books that are handwritten, have splatters all over them, right? That are in your mom's handwriting. And I think that's
Yes.
really something that you might not think about unless you have a profession like you saying, have you thought about these things? And I think that just opens your eyes to how many how many legacy items there are that have nothing to do with actual things or money.
Yes. Yes. So true.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
Is there anything I've missed that you would like to share with listeners? Any pieces of advice as we're all kind of going through this life of where there is loss, there
Yeah.
are unexpected things.
Yeah, I think to tie back to the question you asked earlier of, what does a disaster scenario look like? There's a lot of steps you can take ahead of time to prevent those. And we talked through some of what those look like, but one that I have a personal soapbox for is setting up legacy and emergency contacts on our digital devices and on the
Mm,
platforms we use. So there's three very easy ones that can be done. And I'll share the links with you so you can maybe
great.
put them in the show
Yes.
notes. But
Great.
Apple. And so that can be if you have an Apple phone, a computer, an iPad. If you have any Apple device, this should be done. You can set up a legacy contact. And that's someone that if something happened to you, they would be able to access your iCloud information, which again can point towards what apps did you have, your photos, your voicemail, some of those more sentimental things, in addition to the apps that we use often can provide that roadmap for where were we banking? Where did I have subscriptions to? Where was I shopping? Things like that. So Apple is a big one. Meta is another big one, and that is the parent company. Most people know this, but if you don't, the parent company for Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and probably more. But those are the three. Those are three big ones. And again, being able to be the legacy contact allows you to memorialize those accounts, close those accounts, take action to make sure that there aren't any fraudulent activities going on those that we so often see after someone has died.
Isn't that the
And then
saddest? Maybe
it is
you could share a little bit.
sad. And
I don't think people realize that this, after somebody passes away, when the death is announced, it is prime time for criminals.
it is. And it's really unfortunate and a sad reality that does happen. But one more reason that working with an after loss professional can be a benefit, we're really honing in on, hey, if there's real estate, let's make sure this is secured. Because once an obituary is posted or once neighbors even find out that someone has died, there's no telling, unfortunately, what's going to be happening next. And so there's some important steps that need to take with our physical lives, with our digital lives, to make sure that things are secured. I worked with a client who we were doing legacy preparation, but she shared a story that her sister had passed away. And within 3 weeks of passing, at this time, the obituary had been posted online. They had had a funeral. Someone had already started creating fake accounts under this person's name because they knew it wouldn't be flagged by the person and messaging folks. And so
Oh,
she, as the grieving sister, received a Facebook message from her sister who had just passed away 3 weeks prior. And again, talk about adding to grief and anger. That's not helpful. So if that person had their Meta account with memorialization settings and legacy settings set up, someone would have been able to have notified and at least put some stop to some of that fraudulent activity.
and then you said there was a third thing before I so
Yes.
rudely cut you off.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, not at all. And then thirdly, Google. Google's a huge one. I would say most people I know have at least, maybe it's not their main account, but something, a Gmail account, or they use Google Drive for photo storage, things like that. Also, a lot of Android phones are kind of monitored and managed by Google. So that's a huge one as well for folks to set up. So those are the three links that we'll share in the podcast. I'll share with you, Betty, but I would say to set all three of those up is going to take someone less than 15 minutes and can provide such relief to someone if they need to access it upon your death.
That's really good advice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those tips.
Yes.
It's things that we don't think about, right? We don't
Yeah,
think about it at all.
it is. And if you have kids, make your kids do it too. Because again, if something happens to your kids, God forbid, you want to make sure that you have access to devices. So I've worked with parents who have truly tragically lost children of any age, but 18 to 26, and they can't access the phone. And there's so much information that they wish they could get from messages or devices to know what had maybe happened. So,
Oh.
yeah.
Well, I do ask all guests, while you're so busy, you have a child with one on the way, you're building your own amazing business in an industry that requires a lot of empathy and technical skills. How do you stay centered for yourself?
Yeah, I think my family helps with that a lot. We have I don't know that I would call them rituals, but things that we do every day that really ground me into when I'm home and being able to step into that family space, we walk the dogs together, we eat meals together. And I know that sounds so simple, but for me, that's just a really grounding space to be present. And so that's something that I love to do. Just as simple as walking outside. We live in such a beautiful place here. I'm lucky to have some green space behind our neighborhood that we can go and feel one with nature, if you will.
Well, a lot of families aren't able to have meals together, and it is such a blessing and
It
a
is.
priority. You make it a priority, so that is very special that way too.
Yeah, I would say, there's moments with a 2-year-old that having a family meal is not so serene, but
Yes.
yeah, to your point, we're very lucky to be able to be together and to prioritize that time.
And my other question that I ask folks is, in retirement, studies have shown that if you go into retirement having a passion or a hobby that you love to do, that you'll be much more confident and happier during your retirement years. Do you have a hobby or passion that maybe you don't have a ton of time for right now, but that you do like to do, that maybe someday
Yes.
you would like to dedicate more time to?
Yes, I, as many people did during COVID, started baking sourdough, and I love it. I really do. I love baking in general. It's kind of been a tradition passed down through my mom's side of the family. My grandma and my mom are both incredible bakers,
Even here in
and
Colorado, it's so hard to do
yes,
here.
grandma was in Nebraska, but mom is in Colorado, and she
Wow.
gets it done. I'm not nearly as skilled as she is, but that's something I think that given more time, I'd like to devote a little bit more. Skill practicing towards, if you will. And I'm sure that the people in my life would appreciate it, or maybe not, because I would be adding to their sugar intake.
Yeah. What do you do? Eat it all, or do you give it away as gifts? Or
Yeah, right now I'm not making enough for it to be a problem, but
yeah.
yeah, probably gift a lot and freeze some and
So do you
eat too
always?
much of it.
Yeah. Do you always have a little starter in the fridge?
Yeah, so with sourdough, I keep my sourdough in the fridge, and that just makes it so I don't have to bake every 2 days. I know some people who feed their starter every day, every 2 days, however it may be. And again, with a business and little ones, if I bake once every 2 weeks or so, that's a win for me right now. So that's kind of how we do it.
Oh, it's like a little baby in your freezer, in
It
your
is one that really does
refrigerator.
requires not a lot of attention, so
Well,
I
that's
like that.
perfect. Perfect.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing with me. I really appreciate it. I think you shared a lot of good information today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I'll just say, if anyone wants to learn more, we've talked a lot about the PALS website, Professionals of After Loss Services. And in addition, my website, afterlossadvisors.com, has some free download resources for folks who may have experienced the loss. There's a free after loss checklist that can be downloaded, and other resources there as well.
Is that the best way to reach out to you? Is through your website, or do you prefer phone or another way?
Any way that feels comfortable to the client. My phone number, my email are listed on the website, and they
Okay,
can also book direct time with me through my website, through a calendar link. So all three of those options are
okay,
available.
great. I'll put that in the
Yeah.
show notes as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you.